This video's sponsor, Squarespace, has just undergone one of their most ambitious refreshes ever, delivering all new tools to supercharge your ability to make stunning-looking websites to power your business or project. New AI-powered design templates and search tools give you more flexibility and reach than ever before, so click below to start building or stick around to the end of the video to learn more.
Before games like Hollow Knight, Celeste, and Dead Cells, there existed another game that people would point to as an example of what the indie scene were capable of, and it was called Hyper Light Drifter. It was the result of a wildly successful Kickstarter campaign spun up by new studio Heart Machine, and what a debut it was, boasting gorgeous pixel art, stylish combat, engrossing world building, and a novel non-linear structure. It was successful enough that the studio went on to create Solar Ash, a stunning flow state platformer with similarly impressive art direction, only now translated to 3D. They then stuck with 3D as they returned to the universe of Hyper Light Drifter, but not for a direct sequel. Hyper Light Breaker was instead a co-op roguelite thing. This is where things kinda took a turn for Heart Machine. I reviewed the early access release for this, and I did not recommend it, due to its rather clunky gameplay, technical woes, and crucially a lack of vision that made their previous games so beloved. And I wasn't the only one who felt that way. It was met with middling reception, so middling in fact that the studio announced it would not be able to complete the project in the way that they hoped, and would wrap it up as best they could before moving on. After multiple layoffs both before and after the fact, there was really only one glimmer of hope left for this studio, a metroidvania by the name Possessors. I recall seeing the first trailers for this and thinking, hell yeah man, Heart Machine are back. There was a clear vision here. It seemed like it had everything that Hyper Light Breaker was missing, and I felt doubly hopeful seeing as it was being published by Devolver Digital, a well-known publisher who's historically had a good eye for these things. Having finished the game after about 20 plus hours, I can say that, sadly, Possessors isn't quite the triumphant comeback I had hoped for. When you think about all the good to great Metroidvanias out there, there's at least one or indeed multiple things that you can point to and go, yeah, that's the thing it does especially well. Possessors has glimmers of those things, but each are in some way compromised to the point that they never shine in the way that they should. For example, it could have been the world design, but it's hit and miss. While it's certainly functional, the lack of creativity here in its visuals and the abilities you use to explore it make for a world that doesn't spark much in the way of wonder. It could have been the combat, which promised to bring platform fighter combat to the genre, and some parts of it do work, but overall I found it frustratingly sluggish owing to several kinks that probably wouldn't have been there had the studio closer studied the many other 2D action games on the market. What about the story then? Well, it does come close to being that special thing. The protagonist and her demon companion have a fun dynamic, and their journey explores some quite emotionally resonant themes in a genre that doesn't typically try to say much. But again, I wouldn't say it's anything standout, as its overt writing makes for predictable beats, killing the intrigue that would typically pull you through these sorts of games. So there are elements that do work, to the point that Possessors does feel like kind of a decent first attempt at a Metroidvania, but I think Heart Machine needed to deliver a lot more than that to get them out of the tight spot they're in. Possessors begins with flashes of our protagonist, a girl named Luca, chasing after a friend following some altercation before the explosion of a nearby facility sees them both knocked unconscious. She briefly strains her eyes open in time to watch her friend get killed by what appears to be a demon before blacking out again. Eventually, she wakes up to find her legs blown off in the incident, and in dragging herself in search for help, chances upon another demon called Rem, who's also mortally wounded. So the two strike a deal. She gets her legs back and the power to get revenge for her friend's murder, while he gets a living vessel and the promise that she'll get him back home. This dynamic between Luca and Rem really is the highlight here. They have an interesting juxtaposition. One, a meek girl hell-bent on spilling demon blood. The other, a powerful demon who wants nothing more than to escape the violence. And those conflicting motives do lead to some great character growth. They eventually come to find that they're both cut from a similar cloth. Both have a history of being mistreated by loved ones. Possessors is kind of an exploration on Stockholm Syndrome, specifically how one can be so blinded to it when at the hands of loved ones, whether they be familial, platonic, or romantic. It's about the self-blame, about clinging to the good parts of someone when the bad parts are overwhelmingly destructive, and how these traits are often invisible to you until someone else brings them into view. I can't get too deep into it without talking spoilers, but yeah, this is all surfaced quite effectively in the way that both Luca and Rem share memories from their past, with each able to act as outside observers and bring them back to reality. So these themes and these characters are great, but I did find the broader plot painfully predictable. All the major beats are so obviously forecasted that by the time they've come around, they've lost all impact. For example, right from the rip, you'll see some corpo posters promoting some infinite energy battery. You put that together with the explosion of that corporation's facility that led to a dimensional rift that has demons pouring out of it, and yeah, it's easy to guess how the corpos were producing such batteries. Like I said, the story has multiple reveals like this that don't land in the way that they should, owing to the rather overt writing, and that lack of intrigue ultimately meant that I wasn't exactly chomping at the bit to reach the credits. If that intrigue is missing from the story, I expected it then to be present in the metroidvania exploration stuff, but in that department, Possessors isn't really doing much. This is a pretty stock standard metroidvania. You've got a sprawling, interconnected map gated by various traversal abilities. The best thing I could say about it is that it works. Like many games in this genre, it felt good to get a new ability, loop back to the many places I couldn't previously access, and be rewarded with some new weapons or optional boss fights. But what I will say is that none of those abilities are anything you haven't seen before. I mean, the fact that a simple air dash is one of the final abilities you unlock says it all, really. And yeah, that's disappointing, given discovering all new traversal twists is one of the things that often makes new Metroidvanias so exciting. Hell, even the low-key ones like Tales of Kenzera Zhao managed to come up with some new ideas. Aside from a lack of new ideas, there are a number of other things that make exploration less compelling than I hoped. The game's structure, for one. Very early on you discovered that to get Rem home, you'll need to collect 4 eyeballs to open the vault door that leads to the rift, and these just get immediately pinned on your map. The fact that you already know where you need to go, and that after you collect all these eyeballs you'll have beaten the game, that kinda tarnishes the exploration that often defines this genre. It's no longer about organically falling deeper into this world and story, unsure about what twists might await you. Instead, it just becomes about reaching the specific things in order to progress. I guess in some sense I'm glad those markers are there to at least give me a carrot to chase, since Possessor's world design isn't really doing that by itself. I spoke about how the abilities aren't that interesting, and that of course informs the level design, but the biggest letdown here is that it isn't doing much artistically. I'll preface by saying that the characters look great. Luca, Rem, some of the other notable humans and demons you meet, they're all unique, vibrant, expressive, and I would say that extends to all the 2D stuff here. But the environments, they're all 3D, and they're noticeably more dull. It's no doubt by design, to make characters pop, to make combat more readable, and to push the bleakness of the city, and for what it's worth, it's effective at doing those things, but it doesn't make for a world that feels particularly inviting to explore. The environments just lack detail. There isn't much in the way of environmental storytelling or additional world building to chew on outside of that one corporation's authoritarian grip on the city. I hate to be harsh, but it almost looks like video game grey boxing, like they're temporary assets that were at some point meant to get the level of artistic flair that the characters do, but never did. It leads to a very samey feel to each of the areas, and that's not just because of how they look either. The lack of identity in each of its zones is exacerbated by the limited enemy variety. There's really only a handful of enemies here, all of which you'll encounter within the first few hours, only you might see them rescaled or recolored slightly later on. Like, I got excited when I explored this swamp region for the first time and encountered these giant demonic frogs, but come to find they reappear in many other regions, even where it doesn't necessarily make sense. These areas don't feel all that different to traverse either. Like, the shopping mall feels no different to the school campus, which feels no different to the aquarium. So if it's not doing anything interesting with the world design, you'd hope then that Possessors would at least have some decent combat to prop it up. After all, it's kinda hard to get that wrong these days given the wealth of 2D action games to learn from. But it seems to me like Heart Machine needed to do a bit more homework. Possessor's combat is not great, to be honest with you. It's especially disappointing given there are bones of a cool combat system here. It hopes to bring the combat of platform fighters like Super Smash Bros. Into a metroidvania setting, and I think that's pretty rad, since there aren't many non-PvP games that have that style of combat. And there are parts of that do work here. The parry, for example, feels great. It's a comfy 360-degree block, gaining a little extra duration for each block, allowing you to easily deal with rapid hits. I like the knockback that occurs when you manage to stun an enemy, sending them careening across the field or bouncing all over the environment. I also like the sort of build your own moveset thing that they've got going on. It's similar to the Ender Lilies games, but instead of mapping your abilities to specific buttons, they're instead mapped to directional inputs to give it more of that platform fighter feel. However, I think it unfortunately suffers from many of the same issues as Hyperlight Breaker's combat did. The first thing I noticed was that you can't switch your attack direction mid-combo. You have to take a beat to turn around every time, and that doesn't feel great. Then there's the stun locks. Getting hit mid-air will see you completely stunned until you hit the ground, which can be quite frustrating given the many projectile firing enemies that you come across. Similarly, getting hit by any enemy attack will stun you for a brief moment, allowing them or others to follow up multiple times, and in fact there are certain attacks that'll stun you for a much longer period with absolutely nothing you can do but watch yourself take the hits. There's also just how stiff it all feels. All your abilities have awkward animation locks that hang for a little too long, and attacking in midair completely halts all horizontal momentum, which feels awful. And it's just bizarre given that air combos are such a core part of platform fighters, and indeed something this game tries to encourage. I'm not sure if these things are intended as an extra strategic layer or just oversights, but in aggregate they make the combat feel rather awkward and imprecise, in a kind of game that you'd expect to be going all in on fluidity. Again, it's a little surprising that Possessor's even shipped with such issues, given they should be immediately obvious to anyone who spent even just a few minutes with any of the great 2D action games that have come out over the last decade. And there's also the fact that these are many of the things that Hyperlight Breaker was criticized for, so I expected the studio to be laser focused on learning from those mistakes, but they haven't. Ultimately, its sluggishness meant that I was never really looking forward to combat encounters, whether they be against basic enemies or bosses, and that's a real problem in a 20+ hour game where combat makes up so much of the experience. So the question on my mind is, how does a studio like Heart Machine debut with an indie darling such as Hyperlight Drifter, a game that inspired many budding game developers like myself, and I still see get talked about in indie game discussions today, get to this point where the best they can offer is a pretty simple metroidvania that's rough around the edges and can't even quite nail the basics? Well, I'm sure there's many factors, but I think that one of Heart Machine's critical flaws is that they've never given themselves the chance to iterate. With every release, they've gone for something quite different from what came before, kicking off their journey with a top-down action adventure, then onto a flow state movement game, then a co-op roguelite thing, and now a side-scrolling Metroidvania. I admire that boldness, and I am sympathetic to developers wanting to challenge themselves and try new things, rather than box themselves into a specific style of game. However, I think you can do that without having to build from scratch every time and make yourself vulnerable to all the extra challenges that come with that. I think that's actually a key factor to the success of studios like Giant Squid and Supergiant Games. Their debut titles got the art and gameplay down pat, just as Hyperlight Drifter did, but where those studios built on top of those solid foundations with each release and played to their strengths, Heart Machine started throwing new ideas at the wall in the hopes that they'd stick. And to their credit, one of their ideas, Solar Ash, did stick, but it seems to me like that was an exception, not proof of a viable strategy. In jumping again into unfamiliar territory, Heart Machine stumbles in a few key areas and in some ways makes the same mistakes that they made before, mistakes that the studio probably can't afford to make right now. Now again, I will say Possessors is certainly an improvement over Hyperlight Breaker. It doesn't shoot for much, but in doing so, manages to be a more cohesive game. It does manage to eke out those vibes that I loved so much about the studio's best games, owing to a combination of its artistic flourishes and atmospheric music. And it's got a nice story, touching on themes that this genre hasn't explored before, driven by an endearing companionship between its two main characters. It's not enough for me to recommend this, but at a mere $20 US, it is enough for me to say that if you're a fan of this genre and you've played all the big hitters, then maybe check out some other reviews and judge for yourself whether enough parts of it resonate with you to justify a purchase. In the end though, I found myself disappointed in what Heart Machine have delivered here. This studio set a remarkably high bar for themselves all those years ago with Hyperlight Drifter, and so I hold them to that high standard, and I've always yearned to see them reach those heights again. But I guess at this point, with Possessors being as uneven as it is, my only hope is that they get another chance at all.
For 6 years now, this video's sponsor, Squarespace, has been helping me turn my dream into reality. They help people create custom websites quickly and easily, and given how important a website is to a business, a good website can be the thing that helps you get your idea off the ground. Squarespace's tools have always been intuitive and industry leading, but they've never rested on their laurels, and I personally have seen how much their tools have evolved over the last 6 years. This latest update though is probably their biggest yet. It's a refresh that helps you leverage the power of AI for both creation and search optimization. On the creation side, you can now input prompts like build a website for a dance studio, and Squarespace will instantly generate a site that fits that style of business with images, fonts, colors, and layouts that feel right for your target audience. You can still customize the site as much as you like after that, but as a starting point, these are going to get you most of the way there. The other big upgrade is AI search testing. No matter how you feel about it, AI search is here to stay, and Squarespace now has a tool that will report on how often your website is surfaced in AI search queries. There's so much more that Squarespace is capable of, from booking appointments to e-commerce to detailed analytics, and all of it is so easy to get to grips with. You don't need any experience building websites to build a truly cutting-edge, professional-looking website. So if you want to get started, then visit squarespace.com to start building your website through their free trial. And if you want to get serious, use offer code SKILLUP for 10% off your purchase of a website or a domain name. Thanks Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.